Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Now, as he returned home, Pip was asked multiple questions about Miss Havisham by Mrs. Joe and Uncle Pumblechook, who obviously had ridden over for tea. So he'd come to have tea because even he was curious to know about his landlady. But because Pip was, one of the people who was never understood by anybody, he was afraid that maybe if he's going to tell about what he saw at Miss Havisham's place and the way she was sad and depressive, then people were going to misunderstand her, judge her, and therefore what he just said was all the lies. He told everything that was a lie, and Mrs. Joe and Uncle Pumblechook believed him. They were very excited and happy with what Pip was telling them, and then they accepted that. They was amazed. Again, Pip was very sad because other than Mrs. Joe and Uncle Pumblechook, he was close to Joe. So he did not want to cheat on Joe. Now, Mrs. Joe and Uncle Pumblechook, they started speculating. They started thinking about what Miss Havisham might end up doing for Pip. What would Pip get as a reward from Miss Havisham? Now, Pip later on secretly, privately told Joe the entire story about Miss Havisham. Joe was surprised when he heard that, and Pip told Joe the truth about how the day was, about how Estella had insulted him, and how ashamed he was for being just a common man. Joe replied that whatever was a lie, and if you can't get to be common through going straight, you can never be crude. So he said that you will have to be common if you want to move ahead in life. So he reminded Pip that Pip was already uncommon because he knew how to read and write, and Pip was still not feeling any motivated even after talking to Joe. So he just reminded Pip, Joe again continued to remind Pip that everybody must be common, and before they become uncommon, before they become special, they have to pass through this phase of being common in nature. He decided that he was not going to tell anything to Mrs. Joe because she would get upset, and promised Pip that he was not angry at all, and he advised Pip to pray for his lies. If you've spoken the lie, then just pray to God for being forgiven for the lies you've spoken. But Pip went to bed, and the only thing he could think about was Estella and how she had insulted him, and he would see Joe, Mrs. Joe, and his home, the common house that they lived in. And then again, as an adult, Pip told us about that day was the first link in the long chain that decided the course of his future. Now Pip had decided, he had resolved to be uncommon, and he decided a few days later that he was going to be educated, and he asked Biddy to educate him because she knew very well. Biddy agreed, but Pip was struggling a lot because in his school, in the evening school that he studied in, there was a lot of nuisance which would take place almost every day. There were no resources available to him. The entire classroom shared just one book. The teacher was not interested. The students only kept on fighting and not interested in studying at all. After school, Pip went to meet Joe at the village public house, and the three jolly bargemen. So there were three other people along with Joe. He found that Joe was with Mr. Wopsle, and there was a stranger along with him. The stranger was a very secret looking person, and he kept on looking at Pip and kept on nodding his head. And he asked about Pip, and then he stirred. He moved his drink with a metal file. And that metal file, when Pip saw, he was amazed to realize that it was the same metal file he had gifted to the convict the day he asked for it, and therefore he was sure that there was some connection between this convict and the convict he had helped. While Pip was leaving, the stranger gave Pip a wrapper, a shilling wrapped in a paper. Shilling is the currency. So there was a currency note which was wrapped in a paper, and when Pip came back home and gave it to Mrs. Joe, she saw that it was a £2 note. Joe runs back to return the money but could not see the man. Now Pip was worried that it is common to associate with convicts, and he started thinking about the metal file and what is going to happen now that there was a convict who had the same metal file. So far we've discussed the summary of the first 10 chapters, where we learned about the arrival of a convict or a person rather, who had the same metal file that Pip had given to the convict when he stole food for him. So let's see what happened then. So as we read that Pip was supposed to visit Miss Havisham's after 6 weeks. So he returned to Miss Havisham the following week and was told by Estella to wait in a room which was very sad, and where Miss Havisham's, relatives. And who were the relatives? Camellia, Sarah Pocket, Georgina, and Raymond. These were Miss Havisham's relatives who were talking. What Pip could understand from listening to them and their conversation was that they were all useless and nonsense people who did not have anything to do in life. Then Estella returned back and took Pip to meet Miss Havisham, stopping along the way to ask whether he still found her pretty and insulting. Pip replied to her by saying that today she was less insulting. So what did Estella do? She slapped Pip, and then she started treating him in a bad manner. Pip told her that he would never cry because of her ever again, a claim that the narrator, the adult Pip, tells was false, because he did cry for Estella in his life later. Now on the stairs, there was a dark, sharp-eyed man who told Pip to behave himself. Pip went upstairs. He helped Miss Havisham walk around the dining room table, which was covered with a lot of webs. And the wedding feast was there. Some old food was kept which had molds on it. It was all spoiled. It was all decayed. She told Pip that this was the table that was let out. She told Pip that this is the table she'd be laid out on once she died. So she wanted to lie on that table after she was dead. Miss Havisham called Pip for Estella, who comes with Camellia and Sarah Pocket, Georgina, and Raymond. They all came behind her. All four tried to talk to Miss Havisham, and she and Pip continued to walk. Camellia, she talked about how sick, how, strange it was the way Miss Havisham was behaving, and she expressed her worries for her. And Sarah Pocket attempted to expose Camellia as a fraud. Now they both started talking about Matthew Pocket's absence, which was, again, they did not know why he did not turn up. After they leave, Miss Havisham told Pip that it was her birthday and that these four people, Camellia, Sarah Pocket, Georgina, and Raymond. They visit her every year, though they were afraid to mention the occasion. So they never say, they never wish her a happy birthday, but they do visit her every year. Pip and Estella then played cards, and Miss Havisham again pointed out Estella's beauty. Pip was just roaming around on the grounds, and he found a young gentleman who was very pale, yellowish skin, and he did not look very well. He challenged Pip to fight with him, and Pip agreed, though he was not willing to, but he agreed. He knew that he was going to lose. He was very surprised when he saw that he was quite strong, and he fought with that gentleman very well, who fell again and again and again, and cheerfully announced Pip to be the winner of that fight. After Pip met Estella outside, she was very flushed, she was red on her cheeks, and she told Pip to kiss her on the cheek. And this permission gave Pip a lot of happiness. He did not know why, but he was very happy when Estella asked him to kiss her. Now, the next week, Pip was very anxious. He was very nervous that he was going to be punished for that fight he had with that pale gentleman and for all the wounds and injuries that he gave to him. But then, when he returned to Miss Havisham, he was surprised that there was no punishment given to him and that nobody talked about it. It was entirely unnoticeable. That day at Miss Havisham's house, Pip agreed to return every other day to walk her or wheel her in a chair. So, to either help her walk or to help her walk around on her wheelchair. This continued for 8 to 10 months, and during this time, Miss Havisham continued to tell Pip about how beautiful Estella was and was telling Estella to break his heart. So this was what was going. Miss Havisham on one hand was trying to get Pip into Estella by telling him how beautiful she was, and on the other hand she was telling Estella to break Pip's heart. Now Pip did not tell anybody about his experiences at Miss Havisham's except for Biddy, who expressed her concern, and Pip was not able to understand what was going on. Now, in the meanwhile, Mrs. Joe and Uncle Pumblechook, they actually had started imagining, because Pip was visiting Miss Havisham's house so frequently, that they had started imagining that Miss Havisham was finally probably going to give some part of her property to Pip. And one day, Miss Havisham told Pip to bring his master Joe to him so that he could officially become his apprentice, so that he could officially become his trainee. And Miss Havisham asked him to bring along Joe. Back home, Pip told about Miss Havisham inviting Joe but not Mrs. Joe, and when Mrs. Joe heard that, she got very, very angry and jealous.